To questions for oral answer, and the first question stands in the name of the Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, my question is to the Prime Minister. What assurances, if any, has he received from all of his ministers that they have declared all of their pecuniary interests on becoming ministers? If so, when?
The Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, as members of Parliament, ministers are required by standing orders to disclose certain assets and interests in the register of pecuniary interests of members of Parliament. Ministers who were members of Parliament before their appointment have therefore publicly declared their pecuniary interests. The declaration for the year to January 2009 were to be lodged by the 2nd of March and will be published by the Registrar in due course.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Speaker, supplementary. Did Dr Worth, in promoting aviation training in New Zealand, in which he had personal commercial interests, while speaking in India as a minister, meet all of the conflict of interest requirements set out in the Cabinet Manual? If not, in which respect did he fall short of the required standards?
The Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, as I said yesterday, I think it was unwise for Dr Worth to not have resigned from the New Zealand Aviation Company when he embarked on that trip to India. That left him open to a perception of conflict of interest. I do not believe that there was a real conflict of interest for Dr Worth, or he set out to make pecuniary gain, but nevertheless he opened himself up to the perception of one.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, why did the Prime Minister in the Dominion in the morning say that he had absolutely no problem with Dr Worth's trip, yet in the afternoon say that he'd given him a bollocking for his behaviour?
The Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, well, firstly, the Dominion Post is not published in the morning and in the afternoon. They're published on different days, and I was asked a different question. I was simply asked a different question on the Friday to the one on the Monday.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, did the New Zealand taxpayer in any way subsidise this private business junket run by a member of his executive?
The Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, not to the best of my knowledge. I have a copy with me of the letter sent to me by Dr Worth, which I released yesterday, and in it he made it clear that the expenses would be met by him personally for his trip.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, can the Prime Minister then confirm the accuracy of Dr Worth's statement that he paid for his own flight to India and costs, and does he therefore accept that no other body or interests contributed in any way towards the cost of that trip?
The Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, well, to the best of my knowledge, I understand that Dr Worth was facilitated when he left through VCO, but I don't think that would create cost.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, why did Dr Worth and Mr Grosser continue to hold directorships within New Zealand Aviation and the India Trade Group several months into their ministerial appointments, and for how long was he aware of that?
The Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, well, firstly, in relation to both ministers, they rightfully so sought Cabinet advice on whether there was a conflict of interest. In the case of Mr Grosser, after he raised the issue with the Cabinet Office, it was indicated it probably would be best if he resigned, and he took the opportunity to do so. I'm advised that he informally resigned actually in late December, January from New Zealand Aviation, formally resigned on the 23rd of January 2009. In the case of Dr Worth, there wasn't perceived to be a conflict of interest because, in fact, there was no conflict with the portfolios or ministerial warrants that he held. Of course, once he went on a trip to India, in my view, that created a perception of a conflict of interest. But I will say that the Indian Trade Group, for all of that, is a worthy organisation and one that seeks to build links between New Zealand and India. It's so worthy, in fact, that when I look at the honorary advisors, one of the honorary advisories is, lo and behold, the Honourable Phil Goff, Leader of the Opposition.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, can he confirm that the various people that are honorary advisors to the organisation in fact have absolutely no pecuniary interest in it, and that therefore his throwaway line at the end was just a pathetic attempt to take away focus on the major conflicts of interest suffered by his ministers.
The Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr Speaker, no, I think the Leader of the Opposition should stop acting so defensively.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr Speaker, why did it take Mr Grosser several months to resign from directorships that were an apparent conflict of interest when it took Richard Worth only 2 hours yesterday morning?
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition. Sorry, the Honourable Prime Minister.
Sorry. Mr Speaker, well, in the case of Mr Grosser, as I say, he verbally indicated that he'd be resigning soon after he'd raised the matter with the Cabinet Office. He was actually, and is indeed, I say, a very busy Minister of Trade. Amongst other things, from becoming a minister, he's been to Peru for days, he's been to Poland, he's been to Davos in Switzerland, he's been to India. In fact, he's hardly ever been in New Zealand, but in amongst all of that time, he did spend 2 weeks on the conservation estate. And the one thing that the feedback that we've had internationally, of course, is that Mr Grosser is a very hard-working Minister of Trade, unlike the former Minister of Trade.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr Speaker, have therefore both Dr Worth and Mr Grosser met the high standards that he says that he expects from his ministers? If not, was he just talking tough when he said one strike and you're out?
The Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr Speaker, yes, they have both met the standards. Well, yes, they have both met the standards. And I just point this out to the Leader of the Opposition. He might like to be down here in Parliament this afternoon talking tough, but when he was asked on Morning Report this morning, have you any proof that within the 3 months Mr Grosser did anything that was a conflict of interest or compromised that in any way, Mr Goff said, no, I'm not alleging that against Tim Grosser. I cannot argue that. That was not the case. And by the way, on the same Morning Report article this morning, Mr Goff was saying that if any breach of the Cabinet manual, someone would be gone. Well, you see, Phil Goff wants to sack people for a perception of conflict of interest, but when there was one with Taito Philip Field and when there was one with Winston Peters as a senior member, he sat back and did nothing.